Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into the origins and evolution of American government. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to a new week here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is the middle of August. Today is the 15th day of August in the year 2016. It is a Monday, and it is wonderful to be with you. The beautiful warm weather continues, a little bit warmer than most people would like. This weekend was incredible heat in the east, and of course we are aware of the horrible floods in Louisiana this past weekend. And I understand from the reports on the weather, national weather today, that they're still looking for 2 or 3 inches more rain in that area. I heard a report which I found difficult to believe, but one of the news networks this morning reported that portions of Louisiana had received 2 feet of rain in 48 hours. That I can't even imagine. We had this horrible flood situation here in southern West Virginia, with, in some regions received 7.5 or a little bit more rain, but upwards of 2 feet of rain, I just can't even imagine. I saw some news footage this morning of rescue. From what I'm understanding, the number of pets that are being rescued is incredibly high. It's just that the extremes of the weather are difficult to deal with. The heat this weekend along the East Coast, especially in the major cities, was incredible. My wife was telling me she was cutting grass on Friday, and or Saturday, I guess Friday afternoon, I believe. She reported that the temperature there on the thermometer that she has at the house was 103, and of course that's right out in the sun. And but it's down in a valley here in Appalachia, and the heat kind of is kind of collects there and stays there, and it's difficult to move it, and so it builds up, and it's incredible. It's just I can't ever remember here in Appalachia that we got weather like that. In fact, when I first came here, and I tell the story, but I mean other people have stories about it as well. But when I first came to southern West Virginia in 1971, the first apartment my wife and I had then, which was early in the 70s, 72, 73, we didn't even have air conditioning. We just had a window fan, a large window fan, and it moved there throughout the apartment, and it was, we slept all summer with that, and never even thought of an air conditioner. When people ask us if we had one, we told them we didn't need one. Boy, we need one now, and I know that we're older, and we've mind the heat more. But all of those contingencies considered, the fact of the matter is there's been a significant change in climate over the last couple of decades, and I think everybody would attest to that fact. Welcome to today's edition of the Virtual Center. Welcome to a new week of broadcasting here at the Virtual Center. I do encourage you to get the word out to your friends if you can that we are on, and maybe they would be interested in picking up a program or two on from the archives. They can go to whiterosesociety.org, or they can go to YouTube. And if you go to YouTube, just type in my name, just type in Dr. Bill O'Brien, and you will gain access to our programs. And Horst has been kind enough regularly to post the archived listings of our program on YouTube, and that makes them available to a lot of people. So I do want to thank him for that, and I do encourage you to share with your friends the fact that they can pick up programs. If there's a program that you think would particularly interest one or a few of your friends, by all means alert them to it and encourage them to join us. we have a phone number for those who are able to join us live. We do have a phone number, and if you'll recall, in our last program, last Wednesday afternoon, our host was able to join us for the good portion of our second hour, and we shared conversation with him from Taiwan, and it was, as usual, quite enlightening and very informative. I spent a number of minutes this weekend reflecting on Horst's call for a number of reasons. So one of them, the one that stuck with me particularly, was the cultural issue, and the fact that over the course of 2 weeks after the death of his wife's mother, Horst said that they had to return to the family estate, to the family home, 4 times, and he was talking about how culturally the way that that particular culture deals with death is quite unique. And he said he kept biting his tongue because he had so many questions about about why they do what they do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Quite informative. And that number is available, and we love to hear from folks. And I think the fact that we got so much pleasure out of hearing Horst last Wednesday, I hope you will take that as a notice or an indication of how actively and positively we do solicit your input in our program. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. That's 304-663-4676. If you would like to communicate your thoughts or your ideas or concerns, suggestions, whatever, in an email, I would love to receive it. And I do commit to the fact that if I do receive an email from you, I'll do the very best I can to acknowledge receipt of it. And if I can respond substantively to it, I'll try to do that. And there have been numerous occasions since we've been doing the programs here at the Virtual Center that I have taken an email and engaged in a little bit of research on my own as the result of that. And some of that research, those of you who've been listening for some time will recall, has resulted in a number of programs based on an initiative begun with that particular email. I can think specifically of our introduction to the writings and the thinking of Richard Sennett came as a result of an email from one of our listeners, Harry, who's based in Baltimore. And Harry had taken a couple of classes from Richard Sennett when he was in college and had extensive notes, had read many of Richard Sennett's books, shared them with us. I shared them with you, and we had, as you know, a number of programs here at the Virtual Center on Sennett's idea of the new capitalism and how it differed from traditional capitalism as practiced or during the 20th century, and when America was predominantly industrial. And of course, what Sennett is doing is talking about the prospective changes underway in international capitalism, as a result of what is called the information revolution, the growth and expansion of the internet, the availability of it, or access to it throughout the world, and what that has meant in terms of America's competitiveness, not only America's ability to compete, but a major change in that America's ability to dominate the international commercial world, of course, has taken quite a setback. And it's reflected in jobs and many of other things. We hear that reflected in the campaign right now with the controversy over the so-called TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the issues associated with that and the extent to which it potentially is going to create the loss of even more jobs. And so I think all of this relates. And so, I do encourage you to get your ideas to us, whether it be in an email or whether it be in a live phone call. Again, the phone number is area code 304 663-4676. My email address, and I don't believe I did give it to you this time, is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's W-A-O'Brien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906@gmail.com. And finally, I do encourage you to visit our Facebook page. And I tried to do some regular posting on our Facebook page. If you are a regular user of Facebook, you know basically how to access Facebook. You just go to the home page. And on the search box, in the search box at the top of the homepage, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will be onto our Facebook page. And I apologize for the phone ringing in the background. I won't answer it. But I do encourage you to visit our Facebook page. This morning, I put a posting on it because I was a little bit elated to know that the article that we covered week before last here on the issue of higher education, if you recall, we talked about the issue of higher education as economic engine, if you will, and we based our conversations on the campaign of the candidate for governor here in West Virginia, Jim Justice, who talked about making a major investment in education and envisioning education as a major vehicle or an economic engine in the turnaround of the West Virginia economy from what it was to what it can be, according to him. And so basically we did several programs here over the last 3 or 4 weeks on education generally and on higher education in specifically. We based a lot of it on the 1828 Yale report, if you recall. And we talked about some of the changes that would seem to be in line or in order before higher education can become the economic engine in economic development that it has the potential to be. And as I had mentioned, I had put my own ideas down. I had put on the Facebook page a couple of weeks ago a position paper on education and more specifically on higher education, my own ideas on it. And then I took many of those ideas and I put them together in an article which I had submitted to the Charleston Gazette here in West Virginia. It's the statewide newspaper. And I was elated to see that article was published in this morning's Gazette. And so when I saw that, I posted the link on Facebook, on our Facebook page for the Virtual Center. So if you go to our Facebook page, and again, if you just go to the home page and type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will be into our Facebook page. And after the introduction of me, you will see that the first item or the second item there is the link that I put on there this morning to this particular article in the Charleston Gazette. And I made a few general comments about it. Basically what I said is that it deals with the changes that would be necessary in higher education before the full implications, the full potential of higher education in economic development could be realized. And basically I made reference to the fact that we've been dealing with that subject for more than a couple of weeks here at the Virtual Center. That particular piece, that particular link is on our Facebook page this morning. I put it on about 9:30 or 10 o'clock this morning. And I do encourage you to take a look at it. I would love to hear your reactions to it. If you indeed do have one, you can react to it or comment on it on Facebook itself, or you can send me an email at waobrien906@gmail.com, or better yet, you can pick up the phone and call in while we're on the air live. We are on today until 3 p.m. For full 2 hours today. Tomorrow's program is an abbreviated one, as we always are on Tuesdays, and we'll be beginning 1/2 hour later tomorrow than today. So in terms of exact time, Eastern Daylight Time, we begin on Tuesdays at 1:30 p.m. and we finish at our regular 3 p.m. time. So if you'd like to check out the Facebook page, and if you have reactions to it and would like to call in during tomorrow's program and make your comments on that article, we would love to hear from you. I do recommend it because I really do believe that higher education has so much to offer. It's absolutely critical to the success of economic development. And there's absolutely no question that higher education has played a major role in economic development all along. But the fact of the matter is, the nature of the international society, the commercial environment of free enterprise capitalism has changed. Many of our citizens, many adults especially, have been displaced during the transition and the enhanced skill demands necessary in order to navigate successfully the so-called information age. And the fact of the matter is, the demand for high-level, higher-order skills has become so competitive and so keen, and so many people cannot compete effectively in it, and they have been displaced. And the problem is that unlike traditional capitalism, where a process of what economists refer to as creative destruction was always taking place, where more jobs were always being created than were being displaced during economic expansion and economic change. This particular change is different, because the fact of the matter is the skill demands have become so keen, have become so important, that fewer and fewer of our working adult male citizens, I was going to say males, but females as well, can meet those demands. Actually, women do better in today's competitive world than men do for the most part. And I think that, research basically bears that out. So the fact of the matter is, many of our people have been permanently displaced, and they've been forced to accept service sector jobs that pay less, are less stable, are less secure. Most of them don't come with benefits. Many of them are part-time. Consequently, people have had to work sometimes even 3 jobs. And even then, they can't touch the salaries that they used to make when they worked full-time. So the result is that there are some very negative, bad things going on in our culture, in our society. And I think we're seeing it reflected in the election. Many of there's no question that an awful lot of the support that is going to Donald Trump, because of Donald Trump's promise to restore jobs and restore the world that used to be here in America, I think that's the basis of a lot of his support. He's getting support from this displaced group of Americans. And so all of this links so closely together. I do believe then that while higher education must play a critical role in economic development, especially given the challenges that we face today in a more competitive international world, if you will, then that role of higher education becomes even more critical. And part of it is that we're going to have to do business differently than we've ever done it before. Some significant changes in the way we approach higher education have to happen. Our institutions of higher education can no longer afford to be so selective in who's admitted and who's not. Because the fact of the matter is, we can't continue to cast aside the number of capable, able adults for lack of skills training. We've got to find a way to turn these people into productive citizens who can make it on their own. It's what they're used to. They've always been able to do it. And we have got to basically allow that to happen once again. I'm going to ask you to hold for one moment, please. Abby, stop it. Stop. I wouldn't. Shit.
And we'll be right back to the Virtual Center in just a moment. And we're back with our host, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Agnes. I apologize for the interruption. I'm in a situation where I've been house sitting with the house next door, and I had the key, and the people came back and they needed to get the key. So the doorbell rang, and I had to get them the key to their house so that they could get in. And I apologize for that. I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know when they were coming back. So I apologize for the interruption.
That's okay. Life happens.
Okay, it sure does. It sure does. Thank you, Agnes. Anyway, we were talking about some of the lead into the program and some of the issues. We talked generally. We're talking about higher education and the role of higher education as economic engine. And again, I'm not going to put any more time of our program on our program today on that topic, but I do direct you to our Facebook page at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution. And you can check the link out for yourself, and I do encourage you to feel comfortable reacting to it, and know that I do solicit your comments and your suggestions, your ideas, criticisms, whatever they might be. But it is an article that I really do believe is very relevant and very significant, very important and very timely. And so when I saw that it was published this morning in the Gazette, I was quite elated about that, because very honestly, I'm involved in a political campaign, and I did want to make references to that particular topic. And I wanted to have that particular article as a reference, as something that I could refer to for people who wanted to know more about my thinking, at least on that particular topic, because that's one of the positives that I hope I can bring into the political process if I am successful in this campaign. I really do believe that there's a need there, and that this, because of the fact that I have put in a half a century in higher education, half of it here in Appalachia at Concord University here in southern West Virginia. I do really believe that I have something meaningful and positive to contribute to the economic challenges that the folks in this state face. So that's why I'm very, very elated about that. I continue, as most of you are, to be mesmerized by the ongoing political campaign at the national level. I continue to see situations and opportunities where a well-planned, well-organized Republican campaign could take advantage of some of the opportunities and some of the openings that the campaign of Hillary Clinton seemed to make available to them, not only because of the email issue, and I keep thinking back to the primary when Bernie Sanders told her in one of the earlier debates, we don't want to hear any more about your damn emails. The fact of the matter is it's a little bit difficult to drop them because they continue to be an issue. And of course, at least in Congress, congressional Republicans have done everything they can do to maximize the political benefits that they can, obtain from this particular issue. But the fact of the matter now, as we read, we're beginning to see that there are some very, very uncomfortable links between the so-called Clinton Foundation and Secretary Clinton's role as Secretary of State. There are implications and suggestions in some of the emails that have been made public through WikiLeaks, which indicate that there are questionable relationships, if you will, there were questionable relationships between the Secretary of State's office when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State in the Obama administration and foreign governments. It seems like, it looks like, at least on the surface, that there is the potential for building a case on the issue of payoffs for substantial donations to the Clinton Foundation. And of course, if that's true, that raises serious questions of political ethics and would be an issue that a well-organized, well-planned Republican campaign apparatus could take advantage of. But as I know most of you realize, prominent Republicans are becoming very exasperated and very frustrated by the fact that the candidate of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, doesn't seem able or willing to take advantage of what these opportunities seem to be, and almost continues to shoot himself in the foot, as it were, by directing the campaign mostly on him rather than on his opponent. And it's creating a lot of frustration within the ranks of the Republican Party. It is fascinating for somebody who's, happens to be a political junkie like I guess I am, because I find this fascinating. It makes this campaign unlike any that I can ever remember reading about or studying before. And if you recall, last week in our programs, prior to our last hour, last Wednesday, when Horst called from Taiwan, and we spent the balance of our second hour on last Wednesday chatting with Horst. But up until that time, we were into some of the latest research on the campaign of Donald Trump. And what we are seeing is the variety of position papers that are coming out on the nature of the Trump campaign. It's that different. The people are pointing out the authoritarianism that seems to be embedded within the Trump campaign, the extent to which the candidate himself continues to insist upon being the focus of that campaign. And rather than leveling or basing his campaign on challenging the positions of his opponent, Mr. Trump seems to be intent on continuing to focus the spotlight on himself. It worked during the primaries, but part of that reason was because there were so many competitors. But now that we're down to an either-or situation between the two major parties, and granted, we do have apparently very competent folks on third and fourth parties, namely the libertarian candidates, Johnson and and former Governor Weld of Massachusetts, whose political career I'm kind of familiar with, and the Green Party as well. There seems to be the probability that these third-party minor campaigns might benefit from the fact that this campaign is so between the major parties is so unlike any that has been waged before. And we were focusing our attention on the variety of different approaches as people try to understand exactly what seems to be happening in the Trump campaign. It's that unique. And if you recall, we were talking about prominent position papers on the authoritarianism, on who tends to be supporting Donald Trump and why. And if you remember, we did on this program entire hours of programming on the character, on the personality, on the phenomenon, if you will, of Donald Trump. And the range of possibilities is incredible. And we were in the midst of that last Wednesday when we got to our last hour when Horst called. And I do want to return to that because that particular subject continues to be one that is attracting a number of prominent observers, prominent political junkies, if you will, who believe that they have the insight or they have the scoop, as it were, in trying to explain the phenomenon that is Donald Trump. It's fascinating, and yet it's so important. And I have put a number of these positioned essays, if you will, on our Facebook page. With the theme of narcissism and the ego of the candidate, on the issue of authoritarianism, on the issue of foreign policy and the reaction to the Trump campaign from observers around the world. The fact, on the one hand, many people who really fashion or consider themselves to have some expertise in politics are kind of laughing at us out of one side of their mouth, and at the same time they seem to be extremely frightened by what they see, the potential that they see in the Trump campaign. And we see that coming from around the world. And within the last 10 days to 2 weeks, President Obama himself has ventured into this particular issue. And he has taken issue with Trump's competence to be president of the United States, to have his finger on the nuclear button, so to speak, to be involved in international affairs. Because one of the things that's become very clear is that Donald Trump seems to be relatively ignorant of what's going on in the world. At least more ignorant than political leaders and those seeking votes as president of the United States have ever been before. He does have advisors, but one of the character quirks, if you will, that has become very obvious in Donald Trump is that he doesn't listen well. He chooses not to listen. He likes to function from his gut, as it were. He basically brags about the fact that he's too busy to read, too busy to consider alternatives, too busy to reflect on what might be going on, trying to get his arms around and a handle on some of the things that are going on in the world. And many people want to point out how dangerous this is for the person who seeks the highest office in this land and potentially the most powerful office in the world. Some people are very frightened by this. The polls are beginning to reflect this. States that haven't been Democrat for a long time seem to be trending in that direction of late. Most recent polls suggests that Hillary Clinton is up by 4 points in the polls in Georgia. And the fact of the matter is Democrats haven't carried the state of Georgia since Bill Clinton's campaigns in the 1990s. North Carolina is at play. Florida's in play. And of course the focus, the pundits' focus continues to be on the so-called Rust Belt, on Pennsylvania and Ohio and Indiana and Wisconsin, Iowa, for example, because traditionally in the recent past, those are the states where the presidential race has been pretty much won or lost. But the fact of the matter is, if Trump loses many states that Republicans traditionally win, then the Ohios and the Pennsylvanias might not matter anymore. So again, I think that this particular campaign is a media dream because there's so many directions, so many facets, so many issues for pundits to tie into. And one of the things that I'm becoming, interested in is the potential literature that's going to come out of this particular campaign when it's over. When November 8th has come and gone and the people have spoken and the decision is made, whoever wins it, the material that has been generated in this particular political campaign is going to become the subject of so many studies and so much research. And the question is going to be whether, in fact, this campaign is the harbinger of a major series of changes in the way politics is conducted from now on, or whether, in fact, this particular campaign is really unique in and of itself, and is unique principally because one of the candidates is so unique. And one of the debates that's going to come out of this campaign, it seems to me, is focusing on the question whether we can expect future campaigns to be like this, whether this particular campaign will set the standard for future campaigns, or whether, in fact, this is a unique phenomenon that will be over when it's over, and we'll get back to normal, so-called, in the way we conduct our politics. I would suggest to you, and we've done quite a bit with this here in the Virtual Center, that there is a history of two-party politics as it has been conducted in this country. It's been written upon, it's been studied, it's been analyzed, the trends have been studied, the research has been compiled, and there are some particular pundits on recent campaigns that have become household names. I'm thinking specifically of Theodore White. If you remember Theodore White's book on the making of the president in 1960, on the campaign between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, and how prominent White's views and what White put between the covers of his between the covers of his tremendous book on the 1960s campaign, The Making of the President. And then it was followed by a series of White's books on the campaign of 1964 and the campaign of 1968, and of course the the violence associated with the Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968, and then the 72 campaign with McGovern and Vietnam and all the rest of it. So it seems to me that we're going to have a lot of potential Theodore Whites waiting in the wings for this one to be over. It's fascinating, and it's going to continue to be fascinating. And of course, I think the fact that we all need to be aware of is the extent to which these studies, this research, is telling us what happened and is based on solid analysis, and the extent to which those writing up the research tend to build a little bit of their own priorities, if you will, into their research, and begin to allege things and suggest things about the future of American politics that may not be defendable and may not be as predictable as they claim it is. And the fact of the matter is there has been a fairly steady analysis of the operation of two-party politics in America. And people have been looking for a long time at the strengths of American two parties and why our two-party system has been so successful over the years. Fact of the matter is, all of that research, all of that precedent seems to be out the window this time around. And I guess the question is it gone forever? Or is it just gone temporarily for this particular election and then it will return? We've been looking at the founders. We look quite a bit at James Madison and Jefferson and Hamilton and their role in the emergence of two parties in America, and how the political adjustments to the emergence of two major parties took shape in American politics in the early 19th century, and the extent to which the either-or choice made available to the American voter of the two major parties has tended to dominate and dictate the nature of American politics. It has determined or defined American politics as centrist, as moderate. And what we've seen in the most recent elections is that centrism, that moderation, which has always been focused upon as the strength of America's two-party political system, is now considered to be a weakness. And moderates have pretty well been shunned and silenced. Effectively, Republicans have eliminated moderate Republicans from the upper echelon of Republican Party politics. I think, recently we saw where Senator Susan Collins of Maine came out against Donald Trump and said that there's no way she could vote for Donald Trump in this election because the principles of the Republican Party and the principles of conservatism that have pretty much defined her political career have been violated by this particular candidate. The fact of the matter is, Susan Collins is rare in today's Republican Party on the national level, when in fact her position in the middle, her moderate position, used to be the dominant one of some of the most prominent Republican leaders in the nation. One of them, of course, the most prominent being Dwight David Eisenhower himself. But there have been so many others, Nelson Rockefeller, and many others. We seem to be a political system which has gone toward extremes. And we have the extreme left and the extreme right, each of them trying to pull moderates in their own particular direction. And that poses all sorts of dangers to the two-party system as it's been defined, as it's operated in most recent decades. The fact of the matter is that destruction, is this trend continuing? Is the two-party system as we know it finished? Or is it temporarily on the back burner for purposes of this particular campaign because of the nature of the candidate? And once that's over, once this November 8th has come and gone, our political system will theoretically get back to business as usual. I think that's a very, very important question, and it's one that pundits are going to continue to study. I guess all of this is introductory information, background, if you will, to some of the particular things that I'd like to address today. But the fact of the matter is, it's so important in itself, in and of itself. It seems to me to speak to just how significant and how unique this particular candidate, this particular campaign is, and has been and continues to be. And so again, it's going to be written about a lot. It's going to be researched a lot. But the fact of the matter is, when we try to pull all the information together and make some sense out of it, it's obviously going to become extremely difficult. Much of the writing, much of the thinking, much of the political commentary of recently, as the campaign goes on, has been on the candidacy of Donald Trump. He's been the focus. And one of the things we've talked about, of course, is that that's no accident. He has built his campaign on being the focus. He now makes quite a bit out of the fact that he's funding his own campaign. But the fact of the matter is, some of his opponents have spent 4 and 5 times as much on their political campaigns against him as he's spent. And he's secured more votes than any other Republican candidate in history in the primaries. And they're lost. They're gone from the campaign. And he has secured the nomination. And we're seeing the fallout of that every single day, it seems to me. And the fact of the matter is, the campaign, as campaigns usually function, hasn't yet begun. Hillary Clinton is focusing her campaign on Donald Trump. Donald Trump is focusing his campaign on Donald Trump. And that in itself is unlike any campaign we've had. The fact of the matter is, then, the two-party system as it usually functions in our political system has not been operative. It's on hold. It's on the back burner. And the question that I think we've raised here, is that permanent? Or is it gone forever? Is the nature of two parties as envisioned by Madison and the founders in the early 90s, the early 1790s, is that no longer operative? If it isn't, then what is liable to happen to the nature of our political system, to the nature of our diverse, complex society? What is likely to happen to the way America interacts with the world? What is liable to happen in the area of immigrants coming to the United States, to the image of the United States as the place where people throughout the world can go and get a chance to start all over again? All of those things that have been so prominent in America's development seem to be in flux right now. I just think it's fascinating. Fact of the matter is, the detail continues to mount up. In yesterday's New York Times, one of the regular commentators, op-ed writers for the New York Times, Nicholas Kristof, published a piece on the Trump campaign. And he talked about the extent to which Donald Trump is having an influence on the nature of American politics, which he believes is extremely dangerous and extremely negative. The theme, the thesis of Kristof's piece in Sunday's New York Times is the extent to which the campaign of Donald Trump is having an impact on America, which seems to be making Americans meaner. Kristof focuses, for the most part, on children, on school children, on the extent to which racism and bigotry and hatred seem to be popping up in our schools as the alienation toward immigrants, toward people who are different, seems to be growing as a result of the Trump campaign. At least that's Kristof's position. He makes the point, and he visited his home state of Oregon. Obviously, he's on vacationing, and he returns to his home state in the summer. He grew up in Oregon. And he's talking about the community of Forest Grove, Oregon, which is near the farm where he grew up in western Oregon. This is not on the coast, not on the Pacific Ocean. It's inland. It's west of Portland. His point is this has been traditional small-town America. As he said, it was always charming, friendly, and welcoming as a community. But he points out that in the middle of a physics class at the high school one day this spring, a group of white students suddenly began jeering at their Latino classmates and started to chant, "Build a wall, build a wall." Where that message comes from there's no question. We know where it came from. These same students, Kristof says, had earlier chanted Trump, Trump, Trump. And one student hung a homemade banner in the school which read, "Build a wall." And as a result, many Latinos in area schools walked out. A 15-year-old Mexican-American honor roll student who hopes to go to Harvard, Kristof reports, named Brianna Larios, made the statement, quote, "They openly expressed their dislike of my race." She's thinking of dropping out of school herself and being homeschooled until she finishes. And of course, I think one of the issues there is if she does dream of potentially going to Harvard, she obviously has concerns about her admission to Harvard if she should quit high school and complete the rest of her secondary education in a homeschooled situation. People now feel that it's okay to say things that they might not have said a year ago, she said. Trump has played a big role, unquote. So again, it's probably unfair to pin all of this on Donald Trump directly. And I'm sure he would say that he bears no responsibility to these kinds of things, that he's not responsible for what happens. But we've talked about this. And the fact of the matter is, he is. it appears that he has made hate and bigotry toward others who are different from you acceptable. And the result is many people, including young people, who harbor these feelings, who under the heading, the negative heading that they would label political correctness, are uncomfortable saying what they really feel about Latinos, about people who are different than them. Suddenly, Donald Trump seems to have made political correctness un-American and seems to have given license to those people who now feel comfortable saying things that they would never dream of saying before this campaign began. How much of that can we lay at the doorstep of Donald Trump himself? And of course, that gets into the question as to how responsible we are for what people who listen to us hear. If you remember last week, we were talking about Michael Hayden, who made the comments about Donald Trump, the same kind of comments about Donald Trump. That not only are you responsible for what you say, but you are also responsible for what people hear you say. And if that's true, then Christoph is right on target in linking the Trump campaign to some of this negative behavior that he finds in his home community schools. A report came out from the Southern Poverty Law Center, which said, and this is a quote, "We spent the last 15 years fighting bullying in schools. Yet the example set by the Trump campaign has broken down the doors, and a tidal wave of bullying has come through those doors." In other words, much of the anti-bullying efforts that have characterized the last 10 to 15 years in our schools are gone, are having no effect because of the Trump campaign. Because in a sense, Christoph suggests Donald Trump is making bullying and bullying people whose ethnic background is different than our own acceptable. The Southern Poverty Law Center quoted a North Carolina teacher who says that she has Latino students who carry their birth certificates and their Social Security cards to school because they're afraid they'll be deported. Christoph says another teacher reported that a fifth grader told a Muslim student that he was supporting Donald Trump because he was going to kill all of the Muslims if he became president. And that's a quote. Obviously, Donald Trump doesn't believe that. But many of the things he is saying suggest to people who lean that way that it's okay to come out and admit these feelings that as recently as a year ago, people would never admit. Melina McLaughlin, 17, whose mother is Mexican, made the following statement. They say, quote, "We're going to deport your ass," unquote. I don't want to say I hate them, she says, but I do hate their stupidity. Sally Gonzalez, 17, said that a school club had put up posters criticizing racism, which were covered, those posters covered in graffiti, which said things like, "Go back where you came from," and "Trump 2016. That's the impact that this campaign is having on young people. Obviously, it's not having that impact on all young people, but enough of them. There's no question then that this particular issue, this particular aspect or facet of the Trump campaign is important enough to be garnering its own accumulation of writing and research. This kind of bigotry, this kind of hatred of people different than you are, it seems to me is becoming legitimate. I think we're going to pause and take our break now. It's 1 minute after the hour. Let's pause and take our 5-minute break because I actually hear a doorbell ringing, and rather than interrupt again, let's just make this our break. So we'll pause for 5 minutes, and then we'll be right back, and we'll continue with the virtual center in our second hour. Please stay tuned. Thank you, and welcome to our second hour here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is 7 minutes after the hour. We're into our second hour. And if you are just joining us, we welcome you to today's program. Let me tell you, if you are just joining us, that we spent the first hour looking back at some of the information and some of the perspectives on the unique nature of the Trump campaign, on the unique nature of this campaign as we look at it against the backdrop of previous political campaigns. And basically, my suggestion is there really isn't a precedent for this. This is unique. And the question we raised in our first hour was whether, in fact, this is unique and that after this is over, we will return to the operation of our two-party system as it's traditionally functioned, or whether, in fact, this might be the beginning of a major trend change in our two-party system. Maybe the idea of two-party moderating politics as the two-party system has traditionally functioned in America, maybe that's the thing of the past. I guess we'll just have to wait and find out. But there's absolutely no question that people continue to write and speculate about this, that, and the other facet of this particular campaign, as I've never seen before in any political campaign. And so at this point, it's a little bit difficult to determine whether, in fact, what we're seeing is a reflection of how unique this campaign is, or whether, in fact, what we're seeing is a major shift in the way our two-party politics will continue to function from here on out. I guess all we can do is wait. But one thing we know for sure, there's going to be more written about this campaign when it's over. There's going to be more research and more speculation on what this campaign means in terms of future campaigns than any of us will be able to handle. This is a pundit's field day for those who are enraptured by the nature of politics. And I guess I consider myself, somewhat in that category. I've always been a student of political history for as long as I can remember. I've always found it interesting. I've always found it significant. And I can remember when I first began to put together what seemed to me the most common sense approach to the way our two-party system seemed to be operating. And most of the research that I've done since then has pretty much reinforced that thesis. And I think that's become fairly evident in some of our previous programs here at the Virtual Center. But anyway, for those of you just joining us, that's really, it encapsulates pretty much what we did in our first hour. And we finished our hour by looking at Sunday's New York Times, specifically the piece by Nicholas Kristof, who returned to his community in Western Oregon. And he talked about the impact that this campaign is having on the behavior of school children in the local high school in his community in Western Oregon. And specifically, what Kristof points out with some of the quotations he employs is that many young people are openly acknowledging the hostility that they bear towards Latinos, towards those who look different and speak different than they do. And many of them are more than comfortable assigning responsibility for what they're saying to Donald Trump. And their basic position is, Trump says it all the time, so I guess that means it's okay for me to say it as well. One of the people who commented to Kristof made the point that the Trump campaign pretty much emasculates 15 years of efforts in our schools to thwart bullying among students. Because, let's face it, Donald Trump has practiced bullying in his campaign, in his primaries, and he continues to employ it in the mainstream campaign. Not only does he continue to focus attention on himself rather than on his opponent, but when he does refer to his opponent, it's extremely negative, extremely hostile. It falls into the category of bullying. Some of the things he says about President Obama, going all the way back to the birther issue, questioning Obama's citizenship and all the rest of it, Christianity and everything else. It seems to me that we're hearing things in our political campaign that have traditionally been off limits, and now they seem to be integral parts of the way that this particular campaign, is operating. As I mentioned at the beginning of almost every hour in our programming here at the Virtual Center, we do invite your comments, whether they be live on the air, whether they be in an email to me, or whether they be comments to some of the things that we put on the Facebook page. If you would like to comment on the air, by all means pick up the phone while we are on the air live and call into our Head On Radio Network studios at 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to communicate your ideas directly to me in an email, then I invite you to do that. My email address is waobrien906 @gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906, all one word, @gmail.com. And our Facebook page, you can gain access to it by going to Facebook's homepage and in the search box at the top, type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will be into our Facebook page, and you will see the postings on that page. The most recent posting is one I put on there this morning, which is a link to an article on higher education that appeared in this morning's Charleston, West Virginia Gazette. And it pretty much encapsulates the higher education theme, the time that we spent in recent programs on the Yale Report of 1828. This particular article is really the product or the outcome of those particular programs. So if you would like a hard copy, if you will, of this particular article, then I invite you to go to our Facebook page, copy and paste the article that's there. And if you would like, and indeed I do encourage you to do this, if you'd like to make a comment about that article, please know that I would love to hear it, and our other listeners would like to hear it as well. And you can do it on Facebook itself in the opportunities available for comment there, or you can do it in an email to me at waobrien906@gmail.com, or you can do it by picking up the phone and calling in live to our program at 304-663-4676. However you choose to do it, please know that what you have to say is important to us. It's important to me, and it's important to the other people who follow regularly our program. And I think I am very on solid footing by saying, if you feel that you have something meaningful to contribute, then most of us would agree, if asked, that it undoubtedly is meaningful, and all of us would encourage you to contribute it. And thank you for that. There's one additional approach to the unique nature of the Trump campaign, which I think we need to put into this pot, into this hodgepodge of potential themes which seem to explain a portion, at least, of the unique nature of the Trump campaign. This is a perspective that we touched upon in a program perhaps a week ago, 10 days ago. And I can remember putting a posting on Facebook about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago on this particular issue. And that is the extent to which Donald Trump, in some of his comments about this election, seems to be laying the groundwork for his likely refusal to accept defeat in this election. There are more examples of Donald Trump suggesting that this political election is fixed, is rigged. The implication being that if he doesn't win, it's because the election is stolen from him. And in fact, just yesterday, or Saturday, over the weekend at least, in one of his rallies, Trump addressed this issue once again. He made the point that his campaign is in the process of hiring observers to monitor the elections themselves in order to be able to report evidence that the election is fixed, that something is being done to take votes away from him and direct them to Hillary Clinton. Clearly, he is laying the groundwork for what promises to be a refusal to accept the results of the election if they are unfavorable. To put it bluntly, Mr. Trump is suggesting that if I don't win, it's fixed. The implication being that if he does win, it isn't. The fact of the matter is, the only evidence we've seen, and we've seen quite a bit of it, about trying to fix the election is in efforts to inhibit voting with various approaches to ID laws, voter ID laws, and various other things, under cover of threats to people voting under bogus names, when in fact there's almost no evidence to suggest that that's going on or has gone on. It's a straw man. It's an issue that doesn't exist. But in many places, it's being used to justify very restrictive laws governing the election process, most of which work directly against the best interests of voters who are most likely to support Democrats. Some of these are involved with voter ID requirements. Others involve reducing or shortening the period of early voting. Some of them are engaged in the idea of restricting access to the polls. In some states, the election budgets have been cut to the point that the number of polling places has been reduced, even though the anticipated turnout is expected, at least in some places, to be a record number. So the fact of the matter is, there is every likelihood that the lines of people standing, waiting to vote, are going to be long and slow, and likely will inhibit a lot of people who finally just throw up their hands and say, it's just easier to go home and forget about this. And the people that are most likely to do that will be people most likely to vote Democrat. There'll be minorities, there'll be the poor, there'll be inner city blacks, there'll be a lot of people who don't have driver's licenses for ID purposes. Many of them are in the inner cities who for a long time have been and continue to be dependent on public transportation, don't even own automobiles, don't have driver's licenses, etc. Up to now, those are the only evidences we've seen of efforts to so-called rig the election. But Donald Trump and others are implying that there's a lot of evidence to suggest fraud in the electoral process, and that fraud will be directed not against Democrats, not against Hillary Clinton, but against Donald Trump. And just this weekend, Trump announced the hiring of all of these observers. And given the nature of his rallies, given the violence that has erupted at a number of his rallies, these observers at many of the nation's polling places suggest the potential of violence if anything indeed does happen. But more important, there's something else that is in the offing in this election as a result of this charge. And that is that the usual post-election coming together, mending fences, and encouraging people to recognize that the campaign's over and now it's time for all of us to come together and work together in the interests of governing this nation. That's always been a major outcome of our two-party election process. Trump's campaign to suggest otherwise, that this election is rigged, seems to suggest the likelihood that coming together and willingness to accept the results of the election is in danger of not happening in this one. I've heard a number of people make reference to Al Gore's position in 2000 during the disputed election when the Supreme Court intervened and awarded the election to George W. Bush. A lot of Democrats were encouraging Gore to take his case to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court had intervened in this election process. And Gore made the decision to not do that because his sense was that it would permanently destroy or weaken the togetherness in the community that was necessary to govern this nation. The best thing for America, Gore decided, was to basically allow the election to be over and concede defeat. Even though many people felt that if he did challenge the results, he was likely to win. Many people are pointing that out in order to emphasize the extent to which, no matter how divisive our elections have been, when they are over, they've always been over. And true patriots of whichever party have been willing to suspend the campaign, accept the results, and move on. But the implication is that Donald Trump is not showing any indication that he's going to be one of those willing conceders of defeat. In fact, he has made the point clearly that he's not. If we don't win this election, he's saying, then it's rigged. Given the extent to which so many people, and I call your attention to the Christoph article we just looked at and what some of those high school students are saying as a result of the way Donald Trump is conducting his campaign. It seems to me we have every likelihood, every reason to believe that if Trump is saying that he's not willing to accept defeat and believes that the election is rigged against him, then the people who are most avid in their support of him are going to think the same way. They're not going to be willing to accept the results either. What is shaping up then is a very dangerous political situation after November 8th. This, I would suggest to you, is not something that is just happening because of the personality of Donald Trump. There is some indication that this is planned. Earlier this month, Roger Stone, who is really the unofficial campaign manager of Donald Trump's campaign. He's been a long-time advisor to Donald Trump. The official campaign manager, theoretically, is Paul Manafort. But Roger Stone is still there, still giving advice to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump continues to take it. Roger Stone submitted to an interview a couple of weeks ago, a little bit less than that, on Breitbart. Breitbart is the extremely right-wing conservative publication. And in an interview with Breitbart, Roger Stone made the comment that the election would be rigged against Donald Trump, and then Stone directly mentioned the likelihood of violence should Donald Trump lose this election. This particular article appeared in an online digital publication called Crooks and Liars, dated the 3rd of August, in which Roger Stone predicted not just violence, but what he called a bloodbath that will ensue if this election is stolen from Donald Trump. This is a quote from that particular interview with Breitbart. Roger Stone, quote, "I think we have widespread voter fraud. But the first thing that Trump needs to do is begin talking about it constantly," Stone said. He needs to say, for example, today would be a perfect example, "I am leading in Florida. The polls all show it. If I lose Florida, we will know that there's voter fraud. If there's voter fraud, this election will be illegitimate. The election of the winner will be illegitimate. We will have a constitutional crisis, widespread disobedience, civil disobedience, and the government will no longer be the government," unquote. That is a quote of what Roger Stone said in this Breitbart interview. Again, what Stone is suggesting, is proposing, is that Donald Trump begin now to say this and continue to say it. In other words, lay the groundwork for the fact that there will be violence if he doesn't win this election. Real violence. Stone goes on with this quote, "If you can't have an honest election, nothing else counts. I think Trump's got to put them on notice that their inauguration will be a rhetorical, and when I mean civil disobedience, not violence, but it will be a bloodbath. The government will be shut down if they attempt to steal this and swear Hillary in. No, we will not stand for it. We will not stand for it," unquote. Not only is Roger Stone predicting a bloodbath if Trump doesn't win this election, but more important, he is urging Donald Trump to begin to say that now and keep saying it. Put the nation on notice that if this election is stolen from Trump, his supporters will not stand for it and will take action. This, I would suggest to you, may be the most important change from previous elections that we are seeing in this one. Namely, the refusal to accept the verdict of the voters. The refusal of the two parties to come together and accept the results of the election by suggesting that the whole process is rigged. You are basically threatening the American voter who plans to vote for Hillary Clinton by suggesting the only way you can keep violence from happening is to cast your vote for Donald Trump. Because if Trump loses, we're going to tear this society apart. I don't know what else to say, except that this is the most un-American, dangerous, political turnaround, political phenomenon that I've ever seen in a political campaign. This kind of stuff has traditionally, throughout our history, been associated with third minor parties who usually get buried in the regular election. But for one of the two major candidates to threaten this, to threaten the American voters with violence if they lose, is beyond dangerous. It literally threatens the very structure of our political process. It is un-American. I would suggest it's treasonable. It basically indicates just how serious the threat to our political fabric, the threat to all we've got in this society in the nature of a political tradition, all of it, it seems to me, is in serious jeopardy of being destroyed. This is the most dangerous, unique political phenomenon, political election, I believe, that we've ever had in our society. We have never had this before. I think it's time that all of us begin to take this political process, this political climate, very, very seriously. It's time to stop laughing at Donald Trump. I admit my own fascination. I love the idea. It's reality television. The idea of watching him speak, mainly because you have the anticipation that he's going to make some outlandish statements. And he never seems to fail. Whether it's calling President Obama the founder of ISIS and Hillary Clinton the co-founder, it's gone way beyond Little Marco and Crooked Hillary. Way beyond that. If the FBI or America's security forces pick up on the fact that you, an American citizen, say something over a beer in a bar that seems to threaten the safety of the President of the United States, in this climate of violence and terrorism, we have seen example after example of people being picked up and brought in for questioning because of comments they made or potential physical threats against one of the candidates or one of the parties or against the president or something. Yet here we have a situation where one of the two major candidates is threatening this as a likely, predictable outcome of an election loss by laying the groundwork for the fact that the whole process is rigged. This is unprecedented. It's dangerous. It needs to be stopped. I would argue that it needs to be stopped now by the leaders of the Republican Party. Whether they win or lose the White House, whether they retain control of the Senate or not, seems to me to be inconsequential in the face of this threat. No question, this is part of the phenomenal, unique nature of this particular political campaign. And I think it's high time people in positions to do something about it began to act. Compared to this, the issue of Donald Trump's ego and narcissism, the issues related to Donald Trump's clear intent to make himself the lead item in the news every single day, which has saved him billions of dollars in political costs to conduct a campaign. He's getting all of this free publicity that he doesn't have to pay for. That's why he's now able to brag that his opponents have spent 4 or 5 times more than he has. And he's still on his feet and they're long gone. All of this seems to me to indicate that it becomes rather minor to this particular issue of violence and unwilling to accept the results of the election. It really bothers me that the Mitch McConnells and Paul Ryans of the world are willing to look the other way and not deal substantively with this. It's there. Nobody's hiding it. It's obvious that it's something they don't want to deal with. They would rather pretend it's not there. They would largely like to believe that this may be a threat, but there's really nothing to it. Again, it seems all of this to bring us back to the issue of the people who have become the most ardent supporters of Donald Trump. What is it that is bringing out all of these people to Trump rallies? The pundits are making a big issue out of the fact that Trump seems to believe that the size of the crowds he's drawing at his rallies indicates that he can't lose the election. He refuses to accept the polls, which indicates that he's falling further and further behind in the election in states which he traditionally would have in the bag. He's refusing to accept that kind of data, but instead looks on the crowds he's drawing, the enthusiasm that people express for him and his campaign at rallies, and seems to be concluding in his own mind, look at how much they love me. I can't lose. If I lose, it's going to be because the election was stolen from me. So in a sense, he's allowing himself to fall into the mindset of buying directly into this scenario. He actually believes, or seems to believe, that this idea of a rigged election is true. Roger Stone is issuing campaign advice. Donald Trump is acting on what he seems to believe is true. If there's a difference, that's it. But the fact of the matter is both of them together suggest real danger in the results of this political campaign. One of the most fascinating aspects of this particular campaign is the degree to which Donald Trump seems willing to dismiss the support of those who come out and say that they can't support him. He has openly acknowledged that he doesn't care whether the upper echelon of the Republican power structure supports him or not. I've got the people behind me, is what he seems to be saying. Look at the enthusiasm for me at these rallies. I can't lose. If I do lose, it's because the system is rigged and the election has been stolen from me. Anybody who's at my rallies, he seems to be saying, all they have to do is look out there on the crowd to know that I can't lose this election. I don't care what the polls say. So he's rejecting the evidence. He's dismissing the evidence. He's repudiating the people who repudiate him. He dismisses these people instead of trying to find ways to bring them back into the fold, to enlist their support. Trump seems to be regularly most willing to just let these people go. They don't matter anyway. I can win without them. And the polls are indicating that this is killing him, or killing the potential success of his campaign. Of course, the irony is, with this violence bloodbath issue in the background, we face the likelihood or the contradiction between what's good and what's bad, what's victory and what's defeat. In other words, if Trump is soundly routed in the election, then he's promising that we're in for violence and disorder. The only way to avoid it is for him to win. So the question is, in his mind, a win for him is a defeat for us, and vice versa. Tell me that we've had a previous election that you can define or explain that way. There's one other issue that I'd like to mention while we still have time today. We're at 48 minutes after the hour. We've got about 10 minutes left in our program today. I think it's time enough to introduce a consideration that I've spent quite a bit of time on since I first read of this phenomenon. On the 12th of August, today's the 15th, so the 12th was Friday. An article by Neil Gross was published in, I believe, the New York Times on Friday the 12th. I would encourage you to go to the New York Times online. Go to the archives and ask to see the article by Neil Gross, Gross, on last Friday, August 12th. The title of the article, The Decline of Unions and the Rise of Trump. The Decline of Unions and the Rise of Trump. Since I read this article on Friday, I seem to have come back to it I've read it 3 times. I keep coming back to it as being more and more relevant than it was the last time I read it. I've come to the conclusion that this particular issue is indeed a significant one in this political campaign. What am I suggesting here? Let me first of all tell you what Gross's thesis is. We don't have all that much time. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left in our program. But it's enough time to make the point, and I don't want to get too deeply into the point because we won't finish it. Gross's thesis is the following. If we hadn't done what we did to labor unions in this country, chances are that the major source of support for Donald Trump would not be there. Think about that. Think about the fact that Republicans at all levels who have been adamant in weakening unions, in pushing right-to-work legislation through our state legislatures, the Koch brothers, the American Legislative Exchange Council, funded by the Koch brothers and other major corporate leaders, and the legislation that is being introduced all over the country on the state level that is being designed by ALEC, by the American Legislative Exchange Council, funded by Koch's Industries and other corporate groups. All of it designed to weaken labor unions in this country, which to a large degree has been successful. West Virginia, just in its recent session, approved right-to-work legislation. West Virginia is the 26th state in the Union to endorse right-to-work. That means that right-to-work is law in a majority of our states, in 26 of the 50 states. And this campaign to push right-to-work through the legislatures has been aimed principally at weakening and ultimately destroying unions. Think of the irony of the fact that that success in weakening unions is what has built the support base for Donald Trump. That in effect, conservative Republicans have won a Pyrrhic victory. They may have won the war. They may have won the battle. But given what happens in this November election, they may have lost the war. Their prize for victory is very likely to be Donald Trump. Because the working class, white, uneducated, or lower education population that has traditionally been involved members in unions is the population that has come out most strongly for Donald Trump. His power base is the very base, the very people who traditionally were involved in unions. Which means that unions in our history have performed a benefit, have contributed a benefit to our political process that up to this point has never been appreciated. Namely, they have not only represented their members in negotiations about salary and benefits and working conditions, but they have also been instrumental in shaping the political views of their members. They have been able to counter, to offset, or to challenge the inclination, the tendency, the authoritarian tendencies built into this segment of the population, which, when allowed to flourish with the defeat and destruction of unions, has meant that these former union members have become ripe for the picking. In the racist, bigoted, bullying campaign being conducted by Donald Trump. The political contributions to American peace and stability and security that unions have provided in the past by controlling the political ideological leanings of this particular group has seemingly never been appreciated until now. The more I think about this, the more significant it seems to be in helping us to understand the nature of politics in this unique political age that all of us are living in. More importantly, it seems to lay out a strategy. It seems to make quite evident to union leaders, to the leaders of working people, a strength of union membership, a platform on which to challenge right to work that has all sorts of potential for working people. This may be the counter to the Koch brothers. This may be the challenge to destruction of prevailing wage legislation, to the anti-union sentiment in this country. Translation: if people are at all smart, they will recognize that this nation needs unions. This election is an indication of exactly how much. This particular perspective, and it's suggested by Neil Gross in this piece, this particular suggestion or direction in thinking, I believe, is novel, is important, and is substantive. I'd like to return to it and give it the attention that it deserves, because I think it's extremely important. But we've got less than 1 minute to go in our time together today, so let me take this brief opportunity to thank you for being with us today on the Virtual Center. I invite you back tomorrow, reminding you that we'll begin 1/2 hour later tomorrow than we did today. We'll be beginning at 1:30 p.m. tomorrow, and we'll open our program by attention to this particular issue raised by Neil Gross. We'll begin by going back to the research of sociologist Seymour Martin Lipset in the 1950s, who first laid out this perspective. right now, it's top of the hour. It's time for us to leave. Let me say thank you for your attention, and I do welcome you back tomorrow. Thank you.